Ambassador Rapp, thank you for speaking with CBS News. Given China's human rights record, can Beijing's Ukraine peace proposal be taken at face value?
Well, I don't think it can be taken at face value. And knowing the Chinese and when they've been involved in various situations, their idea is certainly to push accountability or justice off the table in favor of any kind of political sort of stitch up that will work. Obviously, we want peace. There's no question about that. But there's been such horrendous damage. In this hearing we held this week, as of September, more than $127 billion worth of damage to Ukraine, to people's homes, to the property, to the public buildings, to the schools, and everything else. And then just the horror that's been visited directly on civilians, with civilians targeted for torture and rape and detention, and the way that we've had indiscriminate bombardment of civilian neighborhoods, and more recently, the punishment of the civilian population for daring to stand up to Russia with attacks on the infrastructure, on the electric utilities, and on heating and water, and trying to basically freeze people to death during this winter. And we've learned with Russia in the past that when they got away with crimes in places like Syria, they just committed them again. Impunity breeds impunity. And so if we don't have some kind of accountability, we're just, this isn't an off-ramp. This is just a step to the next on-ramp.
This week, you've been in The Hague for the People's Court. It's not legally binding, or it doesn't have legal powers, but you've been able to review evidence of Russian aggression in Ukraine. What was the People's Court finding?
Well, we were dealing with whether there was sufficient evidence to confirm an indictment against Vladimir Putin for the crime of aggression. And understand there is no court in the world now that can do that. The International Criminal Court here in The Hague can prosecute him for war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. And they're potentially working on that, though they may start with lower level people. But they don't have jurisdiction over aggression. And so we wanted to make it clear that there was sufficient evidence. Now, obviously, the evidence had to come to us. We had a prosecution team that presented 16 witnesses, including victims and survivors from Ukraine, people that had lost and buried their own children, people from 7 different regions that had been affected by the conflict. We had expert testimony of General Wesley Clark, former NATO commander, Colonel Yevgeny Vindman, formerly of the National Security Council in the United States, and others, talking about what we had here. And what we had, of course, was a major invasion by land and sea, blockading of ports, bombardment of cities, not some operation like Putin described it to protect Russian speakers in some places in the east, but an effort to really destroy the political independence, territorial integrity, and change the borders of Ukraine. And Russia agreed in 1995 to absolutely respect those borders at a time when Ukraine gave up the nuclear weapons that were on its soil because of it having been a member of the Soviet Union.
So let me just jump in. Sure. Let me just jump in here. So to be clear, you've recommended that there's evidence, or you found that there's evidence of sufficient for an indictment on aggression for Vladimir Putin. What is the crime of aggression?
Well, the crime of aggression is the crime of using your military force to invade another country. And it's defined by the United Nations. It's against the UN Charter, that Russia is certainly a member of the UN Charter. The use of force, or the threat of the use of force, is illegal except in self-defense. And here that clearly occurred. The crime of aggression, as defined by the ICC, in a definition that's universally recognized, even though the ICC doesn't have jurisdiction in this case, also requires that those acts be of such character, gravity, and scale that they constitute a manifest violation of the UN Charter. So, I mean, it's possible you can have a humanitarian intervention, like maybe Kosovo in 1999, where you're trying to save people from ethnic cleansing, and it's very limited, it ends, and you don't occupy territory, and you do it in a positive way. That's probably illegal. It is aggression, but it may not be the crime. But in this situation, the character is brutal, totally violative of the laws of war. The scale is massive, over a front of 2,000 kilometers, 1,200 miles. And the gravity includes the loss of thousands of civilian lives and tens of thousands of soldiers, the destruction of tens of billions, more than 100 billion, now I think close to 200 billion in infrastructure. So this is a scale that we have not seen in conflict since World War II.
So to take that a step further, if there's sufficient evidence for the crime of aggression, where could Vladimir Putin be prosecuted?
Well, keep in mind, potentially the ICC for war crimes, for things like bombarding the civilian infrastructure. And we'll see whether the prosecutor does that, and I frankly hope he does. But for this kind of thing, we would need to establish a special court. And the best way to do that would be to have the UN General Assembly that yesterday again voted with 141 affirmative votes against the Russian invasion, and 141 yes, 7 no. But to have a resolution that calls on the Secretary General to negotiate with Ukraine the establishment of an international tribunal that would include judges from around the world that could prosecute Putin and others, and it could include the Belarusian leaders because they've allowed their territory to be used in this invasion. It to some extent follows the formula of the Special Court for Sierra Leone, where I was chief prosecutor. And we prosecuted the leader of the country next door, the president of Liberia, Charles Taylor, even though Liberia wasn't a party to the court, but they were committing crimes on the territory of Sierra Leone.
A year ago, you predicted Russia would take the playbook it used in Syria, the bombing of civilian targets, other acts of aggression against civilians, mass graves, and they would take it to Ukraine, which is exactly what has happened. Was there a failure by the international community to act up front to prevent this?
Well, it's difficult when you're dealing with someone like Putin. Obviously, he did gain the impression in the past that he could get away with things like this. The international community did not respond robustly to his intervention in Syria in 2015, to his planes bombing hospitals and doctors and medical personnel, his planes flying in support of the dropping of chemical weapons. Obviously, he was able to take action with his own agents, his green men, to gain control of Crimea, one of the parts of Ukraine that the Russians guaranteed would remain a part of Ukraine, and there wasn't really effective action in that way. And so it goes to the point that if we were to now sort of cut a deal and say, keep the territory that you control already, and we'll go back to everything as normal, and let you have your frozen assets and re-enter the banking system and everything else, that would just be a signal that as soon as he got enough people recruited and enough weapons purchased and enough high-tech stuff that he doesn't have, and he was able to use it, we'd face the same thing in 2 or 3 years.
Given your experience as a war crimes prosecutor, what is your prediction on the human rights front for Ukraine in 2023?
Well, sadly, it's that this conflict continues, and we continue to see civilians targeted and suffering greatly. We continue to see many millions of them displaced from their homes, many outside the country, though having been there, I know many want to come back, and many have, though often they're staying in other parts of the country with family members. I don't expect the Russians to improve their tactics. I expect them to be every bit as brutal, if not more so. The laws of war, the Geneva Conventions, the additional protocols, the things that Russia signed mean frankly, nothing. And frankly, it's a situation where it needs to be defeated. The kind of support that we're providing to the government and to the military of Ukraine and our allies is extremely important and needs to be maintained. But then the clear signal that there needs to be a justice for the people of Ukraine means that countries around the world need to support a tribunal. That has had building support. It started relatively small with only a handful of countries endorsing it. Now we have almost every European country endorsing it. I think the United States is now leaning toward it. The key thing will be convincing countries in the global south, some of those that abstain in these resolutions, who see this as another place in the world, and also see that the international community is perhaps too focused on it and not to what's happening elsewhere. But this is the kind of thing that affects everybody, because if somebody can get away with this, if this kind of violation of a respected norm under international law, something that we and the Russians and the French and the Brits prosecuted in Nuremberg when the Nazis did it, if we don't take action now, then no country in the world is safe. Its sovereignty, its integrity, and its people.
Ambassador Stephen Rapp, thank you for speaking with CBS News.
Good to be with you.